The late June sun beat down on Pine Grove Estates, a neighborhood where perfect lawns stretched out like green carpets and where most people knew each other by name. Most people, but not all. Chief Denise Morrison had moved in just 3 months ago, and between unpacking boxes and running an entire police department, she hadn't found much time to attend neighborhood cookouts or evening walks where introductions were made. Today marked her first real day off in weeks. No meetings, no emergency calls, no paperwork waiting on her desk downtown. Just Denise, her new pool, and the mystery novel she'd been trying to finish for nearly a month. She'd earned this break, having spent the last decade climbing the ranks to become the city's first black female police chief at just 42 years old. Denise stepped out onto her back patio, the flagstone still cool under her bare feet despite the climbing temperature. She wore a simple navy blue one-piece swimsuit with a light cover-up and carried a woven beach bag filled with essentials: sunscreen, water, her book, and a small Bluetooth speaker. She had plans to do absolutely nothing of importance for the next few hours. Perfect, she whispered to herself as she arranged the cushions on the lounger. The water in her pool sparkled invitingly, but first she wanted to soak up some sun. Being cooped up in her office had left her missing vitamin D, and she was determined to add some color to her deep brown skin that had grown a bit pale from fluorescent lighting. 2 houses down and 1 over, Heather Richardson noticed the movement in what she still thought of as the Johnsons' old place. The Johnsons had been a lovely elderly couple who moved to Florida after living in Pine Grove for nearly 30 years. Heather had been in the neighborhood for 7 years now and considered herself something of an unofficial welcoming committee and neighborhood watch coordinator, though no one had actually appointed her to either position. She squinted through her kitchen window while loading her dishwasher. There was definitely someone by the pool. Heather frowned. The Johnsons' house had been sold months ago, but she hadn't seen much of whoever moved in. Just moving trucks one weekend and occasionally lights on in the evening. She'd left a fruit basket on the porch with a welcome note, but it had disappeared without any acknowledgement or thank you note. Probably some workaholic who's never home, she had told her husband, feeling slightly offended by the lack of neighborly courtesy. Now, curiosity piqued, Heather moved to her back door for a better view. From her slightly elevated yard, she could just see over the privacy fence into the backyard of the mystery neighbor. There was a woman arranging things by the pool. A black woman. In a swimsuit. Heather paused, dishwasher forgotten. Something didn't seem right. The Johnsons had always been so particular about who used their pool. Family only, they'd say. Never even letting neighborhood kids swim during the hottest days of summer. And now here was this stranger, making herself at home. I don't think I've ever seen her before, Heather muttered to herself, and Heather prided herself on knowing everyone in Pine Grove Estates. It was a point of pride for her, being able to tell her husband little tidbits about their neighbors over dinner. Who was renovating their kitchen? Who was having marriage troubles? Whose kid got into which college? Denise, unaware of the scrutiny, applied a layer of sunscreen to her arms and legs. She turned on her speaker to a low volume, just enough to hear the smooth jazz she preferred when relaxing. Then she settled onto the lounger with a contented sigh, opening her book to the dog-eared page. The story was just getting good. The detective was about to confront the main suspect when she'd had to put it down after her last attempt at reading. Meanwhile, Heather's mind was racing. Had the new owners authorized someone to use their pool while they were away? Was this a friend, a relative, a house-sitter? Or, and this thought made Heather's jaw clench, was this person trespassing? Pine Grove had prided itself on being a safe community, but there had been reports of break-ins in neighborhoods not too far away. The community Facebook group was always sharing security camera footage of suspicious people, walking through yards or checking car doors. What if this was happening right under her nose? Heather grabbed her phone and walked closer to the fence, trying to be casual about it, pretending to check her flower beds while stealing glances over the fence. The woman seemed completely at ease, as if she belonged there. She had a book and everything, but something about it just didn't sit right with Heather. She'd never seen this person at any neighborhood functions, never passed her on a walk, never saw her getting mail or taking out trash. Better safe than sorry, Heather decided, walking back into her kitchen. She hesitated for only a moment before dialing the non-emergency police number saved in her contacts. After all, if this woman was supposed to be there, no harm done. But if not, well, Heather would have potentially stopped a crime. She'd be a neighborhood hero. Hello, I'd like to report a suspicious person, Heather said when the dispatcher answered. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, though there was no one in her house to hear her. There's a woman in my neighbor's backyard using their pool and I've never seen her before. The owners aren't usually home and I'm concerned she might be trespassing. The dispatcher asked for the address, which Heather provided, along with her own name and contact information. Can you describe this person? The dispatcher asked in a professional tone. She's a black woman, probably in her 40s in a blue swimsuit, Heather said, peeking out the window again. She's just lounging by the pool like she owns the place. What Heather couldn't know was that the dispatcher, Tanya, had paused slightly at the description. The address sounded familiar and the description, but no, it couldn't be. Still, she followed protocol. We'll send an officer to check it out, Tanya said, making notes in the system. Please don't approach the person yourself. Of course not, Heather assured her, though she had actually been considering taking over a glass of lemonade as a pretense to investigate further. Thank you. Back by the pool, Denise had just reached a pivotal moment in her novel. The detective had discovered a hidden clue that changed everything about the case. She was so engrossed that she didn't notice the curious neighbor or sense the wheels being set in motion that would shortly disrupt her peaceful day off. Denise took a sip of her water and shifted position on the lounger to get more comfortable. Her phone lay face down beside her, deliberately ignored. She had told her deputy chiefs that unless the city was literally burning down, she was not to be disturbed. After 6 months of 16-hour days establishing herself in the role, implementing new community policing initiatives, and navigating the politics that came with being both the youngest and first black woman to lead the department, she needed this mental break desperately. At the station, Tanya had dispatched officers Lee and Rivera to check out the suspicious person call. As she finished entering the information, something clicked. Wait, guys, she called out as they were heading for the door. That address. Isn't that Chief Morrison's new place? Officer Lee stopped and thought for a moment. You know, I think you're right. She mentioned buying in Pine Grove when she first started. And the description. Tanya trailed off, suddenly realizing what might be happening. A black woman by the pool? Officer Rivera said, catching on. He and Lee exchanged knowing glances. Should we still go? Lee asked, already knowing the answer. Protocol was protocol, and they had to respond to every call. But at least now they were prepared for what they might find. Yeah, but maybe don't go in with lights blazing, Tanya suggested. As they headed out to their patrol car, Lee shook his head. $10 says it's the chief enjoying her day off and some neighbor who doesn't know her called it in. No bet, Rivera replied with a slight smile. That's exactly what it is. Denise had just finished another chapter when she decided it was time for a dip in the pool. She placed her book down, stood up and stretched, completely unaware that 2 of her officers were currently pulling up in front of her house. She walked to the edge of the pool, dipped her toe in to test the temperature and smiled. Perfect. Meanwhile, Heather had positioned herself by her front window, watching as the police cruiser arrived. A sense of satisfaction washed over her as she saw 2 officers step out. They were taking her call seriously, as they should. Pine Grove was a nice neighborhood, and they needed to keep it that way. She watched as they approached the front door of the house, curious to see what would happen next. What would happen next would change the dynamics of Pine Grove Estates in ways Heather couldn't possibly imagine, and would give Chief Denise Morrison an unexpected opportunity to address issues she'd been hoping to tackle in the community anyway. But for now, as Denise slipped into the cool water of her pool and the officers pressed her doorbell, all the pieces were moving into place for a confrontation that would ultimately bring hidden biases to the surface and force an entire neighborhood to reckon with assumptions too often left unexamined. Officer Miguel Rivera rang the doorbell once, then exchanged a glance with his partner, Officer Aiden Lee. They'd worked together long enough to communicate without words, and both were thinking the same thing. This call was going to be awkward. No answer, Rivera said after waiting a reasonable amount of time. She's probably still in the back, Lee nodded. Let's check around. If it is the chief, I'd rather not make her come to the door in a swimsuit. They walked along the side of the house, their boots crunching on the decorative gravel path. As they approached the gate to the backyard, Rivera paused. How do we play this if it is her? Lee considered for a moment. Professionally. We respond to the call as required, explain the situation, and apologize for the interruption. And if it's not her, Rivera asked. Then we handle it like any other trespassing call, Lee replied. But my money's still on this being the chief. Rivera unlatched the gate, making sure to make enough noise that anyone in the yard would hear them coming. The last thing they wanted was to startle someone, chief or otherwise. Police officers, Lee called out in a clear but not alarming tone as they entered the backyard. Denise had just emerged from the pool and was reaching for her towel when she heard the familiar announcement. Instantly, her day-off relaxation vanished, replaced by the alertness that came with years on the force. She wrapped the towel around herself and turned toward the sound. "Officers?" she called back, recognizing Lee and Rivera as they came into view. "What brings you to my house on my day off?" The recognition was mutual and immediate. Rivera's posture changed slightly, not quite at attention but certainly more formal than it had been a moment before. Lee managed to keep his face neutral, but there was no hiding the awkwardness of the situation. "Chief Morrison," Lee said with a respectful nod. "Sorry to disturb you. We're responding to a call about—" He hesitated, trying to find the right words. "A suspicious person in this backyard," Rivera finished for him, his tone professional but with a hint of discomfort. Denise raised an eyebrow, water still dripping from her short curls. For a moment no one spoke. Then understanding dawned on her face. "Someone called the police about a black woman in this pool," she stated rather than asked, her voice even. She wasn't surprised exactly. Disappointed perhaps, but not surprised. "It appears so, ma'am," Lee confirmed. The caller reported someone they didn't recognize using the pool and was concerned about trespassing. Denise sighed and reached for her cover-up. "I guess I've been too busy to meet all the neighbors." She slipped the light fabric over her shoulders. "Do you know which neighbor made the call?" "We don't have that information, Chief," Rivera said, though both officers had their suspicions based on the caller's details the dispatcher had shared. Denise nodded, thinking. She could be angry, and part of her was, but she recognized an opportunity when she saw one. This was exactly the kind of situation her community policing initiative was designed to address. "Since you're here," she said, gesturing to the patio table with 4 chairs, "why don't you join me for a moment? I think this situation warrants a conversation." The officers exchanged another glance before Lee responded. "Of course, Chief." They followed her to the table, sitting somewhat stiffly while Denise took a seat across from them. From her house 2 doors down, Heather Richardson watched through a gap in the fence slats, her curiosity now mixed with growing concern. Why were the officers sitting down? Shouldn't they be escorting the trespasser away? "How long have you both been with the department now?" Denise asked, though she knew the answer. As chief, she made it a point to know her officers. 7 years, Lee replied. 4 for me, Rivera added. "And in those years, how many calls have you responded to that were similar to this one?" She kept her tone conversational, genuinely interested in their perspective. The officers considered the question. It was Lee who finally answered. "More than I'd like to admit, Chief. People who don't belong in certain neighborhoods or buildings, especially when the person in question is a person of color." Rivera nodded in agreement. "At least once a week, I'd say. Usually nothing comes of it, except that someone was made to feel unwelcome in their own community," Denise said quietly. "Someone had their day interrupted, was made to explain their presence, their right to exist in a space." Both officers nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. They'd seen it from the enforcement side, but it was different hearing it from someone who had likely experienced it firsthand. "I moved in 3 months ago," Denise continued. "This is the first day I've had time to actually enjoy my home. And here we are." She wasn't angry with the officers. They were doing their job, responding to a call. But the situation highlighted exactly what she'd been trying to address in the department since taking over. "What would you like us to do, Chief?" Lee asked. "We can speak with the caller, explain that there was a misunderstanding." Denise considered this. "No, I have a better idea. Tell me, have either of you met any of my neighbors?" Both officers shook their heads. "Well, I think it's time I introduced myself properly to the neighborhood," Denise said, a plan forming in her mind. "And I believe this presents a perfect opportunity to put our community policing initiative into action." At that moment, the back gate opened again, and all 3 turned to look. Heather Richardson stood there looking both determined and uncertain. "Excuse me," she called out, walking toward them with what she hoped was an air of authority. I just wanted to check if everything is okay here. I'm the one who called about a possible trespasser. The officers started to stand, but Denise motioned for them to remain seated. She rose instead, extending a hand toward Heather. Everything is fine. I'm Denise Morrison, the homeowner. It seems there's been a misunderstanding. Heather froze, her confident stride faltering. She looked from Denise to the officers and back again, the reality of the situation slowly sinking in. You live here? She asked, her voice smaller now. For 3 months, Denise confirmed. I bought the house from the Johnsons in March. But I've never seen you before, Heather said, immediately regretting how accusatory it sounded. I've been rather busy settling into my new role as police chief, Denise explained, watching understanding dawn on Heather's face. Police chief? Heather repeated, her complexion paling slightly. You're the police chief? That's right, Denise said, keeping her tone neutral. She gestured to the officers. Officers Lee and Rivera work for me. The officers nodded in greeting, their expressions professional but not unkind. Heather looked as though she might turn and flee, but instead, she took a deep breath. I am so sorry. I had no idea. I just saw someone I didn't recognize, and with the recent break-ins in the area. What recent break-ins? Officer Rivera asked, his interest piqued. The department hadn't recorded any increase in residential burglaries in this neighborhood. Well, not here exactly, Heather admitted, but in Oak Ridge Heights. It was all over the community Facebook page. Denise nodded thoughtfully. Oak Ridge Heights is about 5 miles from here and has very different demographics, doesn't it? Heather shifted uncomfortably. I suppose it does, Missy, Denise prompted. Richardson. Heather Richardson. I live 2 doors down. She gestured vaguely in the direction of her house. Mrs. Richardson, would you join us? Denise indicated the 4th chair at the table. I think we have an opportunity here for a valuable conversation. Heather looked as though she would rather be anywhere else, but the presence of the officers and her own sense of propriety prevented her from refusing. She sat down gingerly on the edge of the chair. Officers, Denise addressed Lee and Rivera, I'd like you to share with Mrs. Richardson some of what we've been implementing with our community policing initiative, particularly regarding bias-free policing. As the officers began to explain the department's new approach, Denise observed Heather's reactions. The woman was clearly uncomfortable, but she was listening. That was a start. And by having this conversation here, in Denise's own backyard where her right to be had been questioned, there was a poignancy that couldn't be replicated in a community center meeting or official presentation. Across the fence in another yard, another neighbor had noticed the gathering. Soon word would spread through Pine Grove Estates that the new owner of the Johnsons' old place was none other than the city's police chief, and that Heather Richardson had called the cops on her for swimming in her own pool. The story would travel quickly, as such stories do in close-knit communities, creating ripples that would eventually force many residents to examine their own assumptions and behaviors. But for now, in the sunshine of that June afternoon, an unexpected teaching moment was unfolding around a patio table. It wasn't how Denise had planned to spend her day off, but as she listened to her officers articulate the principles she had been working to instill in the department, she couldn't help but think that perhaps this interruption had been worthwhile after all. Sometimes the most effective lessons came from real-life examples, and today, she and her neighbors were living one. The tension around the patio table was thick enough to cut with a knife. Heather Richardson sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her earlier confidence completely evaporated. Across from her, Chief Denise Morrison maintained a calm, professional demeanor that somehow made Heather feel even worse. So you see, Mrs. Richardson, Officer Lee was saying, our community policing initiative is built on the idea that safety comes from understanding, not suspicion. And while we always want citizens to report genuinely suspicious activity, Officer Rivera added, we're working to help people recognize the difference between actual suspicious behavior and, well, someone who simply looks different from what you expected, Denise finished for him. Her voice wasn't accusatory, just matter of fact, which somehow made the point land harder. Heather shifted in her seat. I really am sorry, she said for what felt like the 100th time. I just didn't know who you were, and that was reason enough to call the police? Denise asked, her tone still even. Because you hadn't met me yet? Before Heather could answer, a voice called from the gate. Hello? Heather, are you back here? All four turned to see an older man in khaki shorts and a polo shirt peering into the yard. His curious expression turned to confusion when he spotted the gathering at the table. "Tom," Heather called out, a hint of relief in her voice. "Come join us. This is, our new neighbor." Tom Richardson hesitated, noting the uniforms of the two officers. He unlatched the gate and approached cautiously. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his eyes darting between his wife and the others. "Tom, this is Chief Morrison," Heather said, her voice slightly strained. "She's the new owner. And these are Officers Lee and Rivera." Tom's eyebrows shot up. "Chief? As in—" "Police chief," Denise confirmed, standing to shake his hand. "Please join us. We're having quite an enlightening conversation." Tom shook her hand, then glanced at his wife, who was now studying the pattern on the patio table with intense interest. "What's going on here?" he asked, pulling up a chair from nearby. "Well," Denise began, "your wife noticed me swimming in my pool and not recognizing me. Was concerned enough to call the police to report a possible trespasser." Tom's face fell. He looked at Heather, who still wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. "You didn't," he said quietly. "I thought I was being vigilant," Heather defended, her voice small. "With all those posts online about break-ins and suspicious people." "What my wife means," Tom interrupted, addressing Denise directly, "is that she's very sorry for jumping to conclusions." He turned back to Heather. "Right?" Heather nodded, finally looking up. "I am, truly." For a moment no one spoke. The only sounds were birds chirping and the gentle lapping of water against the pool's edge. Denise studied the couple across from her, seeing not just embarrassment but also a genuine discomfort that suggested they might be capable of reflection. "Mrs. Richardson," she finally said, "I appreciate your concern for neighborhood safety. That's not a bad instinct. But I'd like to ask you something. If you had seen a white woman you didn't recognize in this backyard, would you have reacted the same way?" The question hung in the air. Heather opened her mouth as if to immediately say yes, but then closed it again, considering the question honestly. I want to say yes," she admitted. "But I'm not sure that would be true." Tom looked surprised at his wife's candor. "That's actually a brave thing to acknowledge," Denise said. "Many people wouldn't have the courage to be that honest with themselves. It's not that I think of myself as, prejudiced," Heather continued, the words coming easier now. "I have black friends at my book club. It's just, I guess I made an assumption without thinking about it." Denise nodded. "That's what we call implicit bias. It's not about being a bad person. It's about recognizing the assumptions we've been conditioned to make without even realizing it. We see it all the time on patrol," Rivera offered. "People who lock their car doors when certain people walk by, or cross the street to avoid passing someone who looks a particular way, or call the police on someone for existing in their own space," Lee added softly. Heather winced but didn't argue. Tom, who had been listening intently, leaned forward. "So how do we do better? Because I'd like to think we're good people who want to be good neighbors." Denise appreciated the question. It was easy for conversations like this to become defensive or dissolve into guilt without any productive outcome. The fact that Tom was asking about moving forward was a good sign. The first step is exactly what Mrs. Richardson just did, acknowledging that these biases exist, Denise explained. The second is being willing to question your reactions before acting on them. She reached for her water bottle and took a sip before continuing. For example, the next time you see someone you don't recognize in the neighborhood, ask yourself, would I be concerned if this person looked different? What specific behavior, not appearance but behavior, is making me suspicious? And is there a way to address my concern that doesn't immediately escalate the situation, like introducing yourself instead of calling the police, Tom suggested, giving Heather a pointed look. Exactly, Denise agreed. Or checking with other neighbors to see if they know the person. A thoughtful silence fell over the group. From across another fence, a new voice called out, "Everything okay over there? I saw the police car out front." A gray-haired woman in gardening gloves peered over the fence, secateurs in hand. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Abernathy," Denise called back. "Would you like to join us? I'm Denise Morrison, the new homeowner." "Oh, well, it's about time we met," Mrs. Abernathy said. "Let me just put my tools away and I'll be right over." Within 10 minutes, 3 more neighbors had joined the impromptu gathering. Word spread quickly in Pine Grove Estates, and curiosity was a powerful motivator. Denise sent Officer Lee to her kitchen to bring out more chairs and some lemonade she had in the refrigerator. What had started as an uncomfortable confrontation was transforming into something unexpected, a genuine community dialogue. As new neighbors arrived, Denise briefly explained the situation, not to embarrass Heather, but to use it as a teaching moment. "I'm not interested in making anyone feel guilty," she told the growing group. "What I'm interested in is building a community where we actually look out for each other, rather than just watching each other." Mrs. Abernathy, who had lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years, nodded vigorously. "When Frank and I first moved here, everyone knew everyone. We borrowed cups of sugar, watched each other's kids. Now half the people on this street don't even wave when you walk by. That's what our community policing initiative is trying to address," Rivera explained. "The idea that safety doesn't come from suspicion and separation, but from connection. Well, I for one am glad to finally meet you. Chief Morrison," said a younger man who had introduced himself as David from across the street. "And I'm sorry it happened under these circumstances." Several heads nodded in agreement, while Heather sank a little lower in her chair. Denise noticed and decided it was time to give her a graceful exit. "Mrs. Richardson, I want to thank you." Heather looked up, surprised. "Thank me? For what?" "For inadvertently creating this opportunity," Denise said with a small smile. "Sometimes the best community building comes from acknowledging where we've gone wrong. And I think this is exactly the conversation this neighborhood and our city needs to be having." For the first time since she'd walked into the backyard, Heather's face relaxed slightly. She wasn't being cast as the villain of the story, but as a flawed human being capable of growth. It was more grace than she had expected. "Now," Denise continued, addressing the whole group, "our department is hosting a community workshop next Saturday on exactly these topics. It's part of our new initiative to build stronger connections between officers and the communities they serve. I'd love to see all of you there." She turned to Officers Lee and Rivera. "Would you mind distributing some flyers to our neighbors here?" As the officers went to retrieve information packets from their patrol car, the conversation around the table continued, flowing more naturally now. People introduced themselves properly, shared how long they'd lived in the neighborhood, and swapped stories about the changes they'd seen over the years. Denise sat back, listening more than talking. This wasn't at all how she'd planned to spend her day off, but she couldn't deny that something important was happening around her patio table. A single uncomfortable incident was becoming a catalyst for real connection. When Lee and Rivera returned with the flyers, the discussion had shifted to planning a proper neighborhood block party. "It's been years since we've had one," Mrs. Abernathy was saying. "And what better way to make sure we all know who belongs here?" Denise caught Heather's eye across the table and saw a flicker of understanding pass between them. There was still discomfort there, still the rawness of confronting one's own biases, but there was also the possibility of something better taking root. As the gathering continued into the afternoon, with more neighbors joining and conversations branching in multiple directions, Denise knew that while her peaceful day of relaxation was lost, something far more valuable had been gained. Sometimes leadership meant seizing unexpected moments, turning confrontation into connection, and finding ways to build bridges where walls had stood before. And perhaps next time she decided to enjoy her pool, she could do so knowing that her neighbors would recognize her not just as the police chief, but as a member of their community, one who belonged there as much as anyone else. News traveled fast in Pine Grove Estates. By Monday morning, the story of Saturday's poolside gathering had spread throughout the neighborhood and beyond. Some versions were more accurate than others, but the core remained the same. Heather Richardson had called the police on a black woman sunbathing in her own backyard, only to discover she was the city's police chief. Denise Morrison felt the eyes on her as she walked into police headquarters that morning. The usual Monday briefing with her command staff took on a different energy, with knowing glances exchanged when she mentioned community relations. "Something on your minds?" she finally asked, looking around the conference table at her deputy chiefs and captains. Deputy Chief Wilson, a 25-year veteran who had initially been skeptical of Denise's appointment, cleared his throat. "Word got around about what happened at your place this weekend, Chief." Denise raised an eyebrow. "I see, and?" And some of the officers are saying it proves your point about the community policing initiative, Captain Reynolds added. Real-world example hits different than theoretical training. Denise nodded slowly. She hadn't planned to use her personal experience as a teaching tool, but perhaps there was value in it. Let's talk about that, she said, closing her folder, because what happened Saturday is exactly the kind of situation our new approach is designed to address. For the next hour, the command staff discussed the incident not as gossip, but as a case study. How the responding officers had handled it, how the interaction could have escalated under different circumstances, and how the outcome, a community dialogue instead of a confrontation, represented the department's new goals. I want every officer to understand, Denise concluded, that what happened to me happens to people in our city every day. The difference is, most of them don't have a badge to protect them or the authority to turn the moment into a teaching opportunity. The meeting ended with a renewed commitment to accelerating the community policing training. As the room cleared out, Deputy Chief Wilson lingered behind. "Chief, I owe you an apology," he said once they were alone. "For what?" Denise asked, genuinely curious. "When you first proposed this initiative, I thought it was too soft." He chose his words carefully. Too focused on feelings instead of enforcement. But seeing how you handled your own situation, turning what could have been an ugly incident into something constructive, it makes me see the potential in a different way. Denise appreciated his honesty. "Thank you, Richard. That means a lot coming from you." As she returned to her office, her assistant handed her a stack of messages. The mayor called, twice. "The city council wants to know if you'll speak at their next meeting. Channel 5 is requesting an interview. And there's a Mrs. Richardson who's called 3 times but won't leave a message." Denise sighed. Her quiet incident was becoming very public, very quickly. "Tell the mayor I'll call back this afternoon. Schedule the council meeting. Decline the interview politely, and if Mrs. Richardson calls again, put her through." Meanwhile, across town, Heather Richardson was experiencing her own fallout from the weekend's events. She'd gone to her regular Monday morning yoga class, only to feel the conversation die as she entered the studio. Her usual spot in the front row remained empty while the rest of the class was full. "Good morning, everyone," she said brightly, trying to ignore the awkward silence. A few mumbled replies came back, but most women suddenly became very interested in adjusting their mats or water bottles. Heather unrolled her mat in her usual spot, face burning. The instructor, Lily, approached her before class began. "Heather, can we talk outside for a minute?" With a sense of dread, Heather followed Lily into the hallway. "I heard what happened," Lily said without preamble. "Most of us did." "It was a misunderstanding," Heather began, but Lily held up a hand. "I'm not here to judge you, but several members of the class, particularly our members of color, have expressed discomfort. They're wondering if you're watching them in the changing room or making assumptions about them, too." The words hit Heather like a physical blow. "I would never." "Wouldn't you, though?" Lily asked, not unkindly. "That's what they're wondering. What makes them different from the police chief in your eyes?" Heather had no good answer. She'd spent all day Sunday and most of the night thinking about her actions, replaying the moment when she decided to call the police rather than simply introducing herself to her new neighbor. "Maybe I should skip class today," she said quietly. "Maybe," Lily agreed. "But running away doesn't fix anything. If you want to stay, you're welcome to. Just know that you have some trust to rebuild." Heather nodded, gathered her things, and left. As she drove home, tears of shame and frustration threatened to spill over. This wasn't who she wanted to be. This wasn't how she saw herself. But her actions had revealed something about her that she hadn't wanted to face. When she got home, she found Tom sitting at the kitchen table with their neighbor David from across the street. "You're back early," Tom said, surprised. "Yoga was uncomfortable," Heather managed, setting down her unused mat. "What's going on here?" "David's helping me put together some ideas for the neighborhood association," Tom explained. "After Saturday, we thought it might be time for some changes." David nodded. "We've been a pretty passive neighborhood group, mostly focused on holiday decorations and complaining about lawn maintenance. But we think there's an opportunity to build something more meaningful." Heather felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of her wanted to retreat from anything related to Saturday's incident. But another part recognized that running away would solve nothing. "What kind of changes?" she asked, joining them at the table. For starters, a real welcoming committee, Tom said, not just dropping off a fruit basket, but actually helping new residents connect with their neighbors. And regular social events beyond the annual block party, David added. Monthly potlucks, maybe, or themed gatherings. As they talked, Heather found herself tentatively offering ideas drawn back into community planning despite her reservations. When her phone rang and she saw it was the police station, her heart nearly stopped. "Hello," she answered, stepping away from the table. "Mrs. Richardson? This is Chief Morrison's office. The chief would like to speak with you if you're available." Heather swallowed hard. "Yes, of course." A moment later, Denise's voice came on the line. "Mrs. Richardson, thank you for calling earlier. I wanted to apologize again," Heather said, her voice slightly shaky, "and to let you know that I've signed up for the community workshop this Saturday." There was a brief pause. "That's good to hear. But that's not why I'm calling. I understand the story of what happened has spread rather quickly." "Yes," Heather admitted. "It's been difficult." "I can imagine," Denise said, and there was genuine empathy in her voice. "Public mistakes can be painful teachers. But that's actually why I'm calling. I'm speaking to the city council next week about our community policing initiative, and I wondered if you'd be willing to join me." Heather nearly dropped the phone. "You want me to what?" "I think hearing from both of us about what happened and what we learned from it would be powerful," Denise explained. "Not to shame you, but to show how these moments can lead to growth and understanding." The offer was both terrifying and strangely appealing. The chance to reshape the narrative to be something other than the villain of the story. "Can I think about it?" Heather asked. "Of course. Take your time." After they hung up, Heather returned to the table, still processing the conversation. "Everything okay?" Tom asked, noting her expression. "Chief Morrison wants me to speak at the city council with her about what happened." Both men looked surprised. "Are you going to do it?" David asked. Heather stared out the window toward the chief's house. "I think I might. I made a very public mistake. Maybe I need to be part of a very public conversation about it." Later that week, the community workshop at the police department's training center was filled to capacity. What had been expected to be a modestly attended event now had a waiting list, with people from all over the city curious about the program, and perhaps about the chief who had turned a potential confrontation into a community moment. Denise stood at the back of the room, watching as residents and officers engaged in guided conversations about safety, assumptions, and what it meant to truly look out for one another. Heather and Tom Richardson sat in the front row, actively participating despite the occasional whispers and glances their way. "Quite a turnout," Deputy Chief Wilson commented, joining Denise. "Sometimes it takes a spark to start a fire," she replied, "even when that spark comes from an uncomfortable place." "The council meeting's going to be even bigger," Wilson said. "Word is Mrs. Richardson agreed to speak," Denise nodded. "She did. It took courage. Not as much courage as it takes to be the only black woman in a room full of people who might see you as a threat," Wilson observed, surprising Denise with his insight. "True," she acknowledged, "but we all start from where we are, not from where we wish we were." As the workshop continued, Denise noticed something remarkable happening. The initial awkwardness was giving way to genuine engagement. People were sharing stories, listening to perspectives different from their own, and asking questions they might have been afraid to ask in other settings. It wasn't perfect. Change never was. There were still defensive comments, still moments of tension, but there was also movement, the slow, sometimes painful, but necessary movement toward understanding. And for Denise, watching from the back of the room, it was confirmation that sometimes the most meaningful change came not from grand policies or programs, but from ordinary moments turned into extraordinary opportunities. A quiet day by the pool had become a catalyst for exactly the kind of community transformation she had been working toward since taking the job. The real work was just beginning. But for the first time, she felt the city truly moving in the right direction. 6 months had passed since the day Heather Richardson called the police on her neighbor, unknowingly reporting the city's police chief for swimming in her own pool. What had begun as an awkward confrontation had evolved into something neither woman could have predicted. The city council meeting where both Denise and Heather spoke had made regional news. Their honest dialogue about assumptions, community, and growth resonated far beyond Pine Grove Estates. Requests for Denise to speak at law enforcement conferences poured in, while Heather found herself reluctantly becoming something of a spokesperson for confronting implicit bias. "I never wanted to be famous for making a mistake," she confided to Denise over coffee one afternoon. In the months since the incident, an unlikely friendship had developed between the two women. Not close exactly, but genuine, built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to something larger than themselves. "Most people never own their mistakes publicly," Denise replied. "The fact that you did says more about your character than the mistake itself." Now, on a crisp fall afternoon, Denise stood in her backyard, the very same backyard where it had all started, and surveyed the transformation. Tables covered with colorful cloths dotted the lawn. Strings of lights crisscrossed overhead, waiting for dusk to showcase their warm glow. A banner hung across the back fence. Pine Grove Estate's first annual community celebration. It had been Denise's idea to host the event at her home, a deliberate choice to bring the story full circle. The Neighborhood Association, now co-chaired by Tom Richardson and David Chen, had embraced the concept enthusiastically. "Need any help setting up those speakers?" Officer Rivera called from the gate. He and Officer Lee were off duty today, attending as neighbors rather than police. "That would be great," Denise replied, waving them in. "The tech team is supposed to be here any minute with the microphones." As the afternoon progressed, volunteers arrived in steady streams. Mrs. Abernathy supervised the food table with military precision, directing the placement of each dish. Teenagers from the high school helped arrange chairs and hang additional decorations. What had once been Denise's private retreat was transforming into a community space. "Quite a change from the last time we were here," Lee commented as he helped Denise arrange a display board showcasing photos from the past 6 months of community events. "In more ways than one," Denise agreed, pinning up a photo from the police department's open house, where record numbers of residents had attended. The city's community policing initiative, once viewed with skepticism by many officers and residents alike, had become a model program. Crime rates hadn't dramatically dropped overnight. Real change was never that simple, but reports of improved relationships between officers and community members were flowing in steadily. More importantly, incidents of bias-based calls had decreased by nearly 30%. "Chief, where do you want the band to set up?" called a voice from the side yard. Denise excused herself to direct the 4-piece jazz combo that had volunteered their services for the event. As she rounded the corner of the house, she nearly collided with Heather. "Sorry," they both said simultaneously, then laughed at the timing. Heather was carrying a large tray of cookies. "Fresh from the oven," she explained. "My grandmother's recipe. They smell amazing," Denise said. "Food table's already getting crowded, though." "I noticed," Heather replied. "Mrs. Abernathy nearly took my head off when I tried to rearrange the deviled eggs." They shared another laugh. The ease between them, a testament to months of difficult conversations and genuine effort. "How are you feeling about today?" Denise asked as they walked together toward the food table. Heather considered the question. "Nervous," she admitted. "But good nervous. Like we're building something important." "We are," Denise agreed. By 5 o'clock, the backyard was filled with neighbors, some who had lived in Pine Grove Estates for decades, others who had moved in just weeks ago. Children darted between clusters of adults, their laughter a soundtrack to the gathering. The band played softly, providing background music that didn't overpower conversation. Deputy Chief Wilson arrived with his family, nodding respectfully to Denise before being drawn into a conversation with a group of residents. The mayor made a brief appearance, sensing a photo opportunity but seeming genuinely impressed by the turnout. "I think it's time," Tom said, approaching Denise with a microphone in hand. "People are asking when the program starts." Denise nodded and took the microphone. The crowd gradually quieted as she moved to the center of the yard. "Good evening, everyone," she began. 6 months ago, I was lying right over there," she pointed to the pool area, "trying to enjoy a quiet day off when the police showed up in my backyard." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. What had once been an uncomfortable story had, through repeated telling and honest reflection, become something people could acknowledge without cringing. "I could never have imagined that awkward moment would lead to all of this," Denise continued, gesturing to the gathered community. "But that's often how change happens. Not through grand plans or policies, but through ordinary moments that force us to see things differently. She paused, looking around at the diverse faces watching her, young and old, different races and backgrounds all gathered in a space that belonged to everyone. Today isn't about celebrating me or my position. It's about celebrating what happens when a community decides to truly see each other, when we choose connection over suspicion, when we have the courage to admit our mistakes and the grace to learn from them. Denise motioned for Heather to join her. After a moment's hesitation, Heather stepped forward. Mrs. Richardson and I didn't exactly meet under ideal circumstances, Denise said, drawing another laugh from the crowd. But what could have ended with anger and division instead became the beginning of transformation. Not just for the two of us, but for this entire community. Heather took the microphone, her hands slightly trembling but her voice steady. 6 months ago I made a call I wish I could take back, she said. I looked over a fence, saw someone who didn't match my expectation of who belonged here, and jumped to the worst conclusion. She paused, swallowing hard, but instead of public shaming, I received an invitation to do better, not just from Chief Morrison, but from all of you who shared your stories, who listened to mine, who showed up at workshops and meetings even when the conversations were uncomfortable. From the back of the crowd, someone called out, "We love you, Heather." A few people chuckled, but many nodded in support. The journey isn't over, Heather continued. I still catch myself making assumptions. I still have to pause and question my reactions sometimes. But I'm learning, and I'm grateful for a community that gives people space to grow. As Heather handed the microphone back to Denise, spontaneous applause broke out. It wasn't just for her words, but for the collective journey they had all undertaken. Today, Denise said when the applause died down, we're not just celebrating 6 months of community building. We're setting the foundation for the future. The Pine Grove Estates Neighborhood Association has some exciting announcements about new initiatives. She introduced Tom and David, who outlined plans for a community garden, a mentorship program connecting elderly residents with local youth, and monthly cultural exchange dinners. And, Tom added with a grin, we're proud to announce that our community policing workshop has been so successful that it's expanding to 3 more neighborhoods next month. More applause followed, along with a few cheers. As the formal program concluded and people returned to mingling, enjoying food and listening to the band, Denise found herself standing by her pool once again. The water reflected the string lights overhead, creating a magical effect as twilight deepened. Full circle, said a voice beside her. Mrs. Abernathy had appeared with a plate of food. Here, you haven't eaten a thing. Hosting duties or not, you need to keep up your strength. Denise accepted the plate with a smile. Thank you. You know, the older woman continued, I've lived in this neighborhood for 32 years. Seen people come and go, watched children grow up and move away, welcomed new families. She gazed out at the gathered community. But I've never seen us quite like this. So, together. Denise followed her gaze, taking in the scene. Officer Rivera was showing a group of kids his patrol car parked out front. Heather and Tom were deep in conversation with a new family who had just moved in down the street. Deputy Chief Wilson was laughing at something David had said, their previous professional distance replaced by genuine rapport. It's not perfect, Denise observed. We still have work to do. Of course we do, Mrs. Abernathy agreed. That's life. But the difference is, now we're doing the work together. As night fell completely and the string lights cast their warm glow over the gathering, Denise reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them all to this moment. A single misunderstanding, born from unexamined bias, had created an opening for genuine connection. A community that had been living side by side but separately was learning what it meant to truly be neighbors. And as she watched Heather welcome another new resident with genuine warmth and inclusion, Denise recognized that sometimes the most powerful changes began in the most uncomfortable places. What mattered wasn't the awkward beginning, but the commitment to writing a different ending, together. The celebration continued well into the evening, a testament to bridges built and lessons learned, and the simple but profound power of neighbors who chose to truly see one another.